Hello and welcome to yet another edition. Why won't they stop? Another edition of It's Your Time You're Wasting with myself, David Didow, and the exceedingly handsome Martin Robinson.
I like the way you say that. I almost believe it.
You're a good-looking man, Martin. Most of the comments we get are about how good-looking Martin is.
I haven't seen any of those comments, so
I don't know why they come to me.
perhaps it's in your dreams.
We did get a comment last week, which was saying from Sean Allison saying he enjoyed spotting our band T-shirts. There's one for you this week, Sean. What have you got? All right, okay, good. So Sean, or anyone else, get in touch to give us some band T-shirt love, and that'll be.
Or even send us band T-shirts, if you see what I mean.
Yeah,
not
do
band
that.
T-shirts, but band T-shirts. BAND.
Either for me, I'd prefer BANNED. To be honest,
would that be actually be a T-shirt, or would it be just?
I don't know. I'm excited to find out what the good viewers and listeners come up with in that. What I suspect they'll come up with is absolutely nothing. As per my goodness. Subscribe, damn you!
We got loads of subscribers last week.
Did we?
Yeah, we had an influx of six.
Great stuff.
That's amazing, and we're nearly on 1,000 subscribers. We are 3 away, or hopefully are still 3 away. We might be 7 away now. I've said all that. Yeah,
we've probably lost a few.
Yeah,
bastards.
And like. Oh, hang on, I've got a thing, haven't I? Hold it.
Have you?
Here we go. Do you remember I used this last week?
I know, it's terrifying waiting. Look at the concentration.
There we go.
Look at that. That's amazing, Martin. Well done. I know. I'm very, very, very impressed. Anyway, if you are a listener or a viewer who made it through to the end of last week's show, for want of a better word, we're calling it a show, I think. Is that, you happy with that?
Episode, program?
Yeah.
Pod?
Pod, yeah. If you did make it that far, you'll remember we teed up this week's episode and we said we're going to be talking about engagement. What the hell is engagement? Is there an engagement crisis in our schools? And if there is, what should we do about it? So I'm going to start off because this, for me anyway, I don't know about you, Martin, for me, this sort of prompted a bit of thinking. There was back on the 5th of June, the TES had an article which said curriculum fuels pupils' engagement crisis, warns Lift CEO. So Bex Boomer-Clark told the House of Lords Social Mobility Committee that we needed radical solutions to address an engagement crisis. And one of the ways she was saying that this crisis is manifesting is that, as probably anyone who's working in schools is very well aware, students are not attending in the numbers that they were pre-pandemic. It's never completely bounced back. So she said, we've got a more discerning group of young people who are telling us by voting with their feet that what we're offering, many of them day in, day out in school, does not match their needs. It's not relevant to where they are or what their future aspirations are, and it's something we've really got to address. I think probably with some quite radical solutions. So she said, she went on to say that in an average school for a day, that if you followed a child around in years 6 to 9, you'd struggle to be engaged and interested in what they were experiencing. And
has she done that, by the way? Did she actually do that herself in her schools?
I don't know. She didn't say that she's done it. She maybe implies that she's done it.
Is she talking about her schools? Yeah.
So she Lift, which if you're not familiar with Lift academies, it used to be called AET. I think I'm right in saying it's the second biggest academy trust in England, and they run 57 academies. And she talks about the fact that in Lift, they did a survey to measure feelings of belonging and engagement, and this metric, I haven't seen it. I don't know what's in it. The numbers fell off a cliff after year 6, and that's a bad thing. So there we are. Is there an engagement crisis? So certainly, if we look at if we just measure it by attendance, that might be a reasonable thing to say. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm interested that she's talking to the House of Lords Social Mobility Committee, which sounds quite an extraordinary thing in itself. Is that to get to the House of Lords? Is that the peak of our social mobility? Yeah. We can't all be lords, or can we?
Yeah, we can all be lords.
We can all be lords and ladies and dames and barons and all this sort of stuff. Is that what we should aim for?
You're a shoo-in for a lord at some point.
The red benches are calling out for me, clearly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if she's saying that there's a problem in her particular schools, then what is she doing about it? Do we know?
Well, we don't, but she is suggesting that we need radical solutions.
Yeah, well, that's
pressed on what those might be. She said,
but surely she's in a position to do those radical solutions.
Well, it's it's not as okay. So
that would be helpful, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
If she had to go, well, we tried this and this worked. We tried this and this didn't work. End of story.
Yeah, the radical solution seems to be something to do with kids being interested in, politics and climate change and sustainability and things like that.
Is that what she said?
Yeah, something along those lines. It's a bit vague. Right. Obviously, it's not an article that she wrote, so I don't want to give her a hard time. This is a TES journalist sort of summing up.
Okay.
In their reportage. But then, I and probably some other people, Alex Crossman wrote a response to that piece, which was very thoughtful, probably more thoughtful than mine. In mine, I said that I thought the idea of blaming the curriculum for the engagement crisis was probably, or certainly for attendance, was probably going a little bit far. I reckon that what's my take on, from visiting lots and lots of schools, working with schools, being in classrooms, is that there's quite low expectations often of children's participation. And that there's almost, in some schools, a tacit agreement between teachers and students where the students say in some way that if you leave me alone and don't bother me and ask me any difficult questions, I won't mess about. I'll just sit here quietly and make a pretense of getting on with my work. And that seems to be, it may be unfair to say, but in my view, that trade-off appears to be fairly prevalent, fairly standard. And one of the messages that I get from head teachers is often that, it's the number one criticism they make of their own schools. They say our children are too passive, they're not engaged in lessons, they don't say anything, they don't participate.
Okay. So what do we mean by engagement then?
What do we mean by engagement?
It's an active thing.
Yeah.
That you're actually doing things in lessons beyond being quiet and
sitting there. Should we test out a few definitions of engagement?
Yeah, go on.
So we could talk about behavioural engagement. So which is kind of what I'm talking about there: participation in classroom activities, attending, listening, completing tasks, that sort of thing. But there's also possibly, when some people are using the word engagement, they're talking about emotional engagement, the enjoyment, positivity towards school and subjects, general interest. That might be one thing. We can also, and I think it's quite popular to talk about thinking hard as being a mission for what we're trying to achieve in classrooms. The idea of cognitive engagement, so a real investment in trying to understand and make sense of things and solve problems. I don't know. What do you think? Do any of then the other?
They all sound they all sound good. I mean, I remember a few years ago going to Chicago to watch engaged pupils being engaged by creative teaching, and they brought in some actors to show, I think it was energy transference in a physics lesson, and I was sat there in a Chicago classroom watching this engaging lesson, and the actors, basically there was 4 of them, and what they did, they put a pupil between them and did the old thing about pushing and holding, so the child in the middle had to sway forwards and backwards while and that was it. That was engagement. So getting someone out of their seat. I remember going to a school in Essex and having
those actors must have been desperate.
Yeah, well, they get paid, man. So it's a job. But then going to a school in Essex, and
it's a job, but it's not a living, is it, Martin?
Well, you had to be a waiter or waitress as well. But where are we going with that? Essex, going to Essex and seeing this lesson, and
from Chicago to Essex. Where about in Essex?
I travel. I'm not saying.
Billericay?
I'm not saying. And watching this lesson in which the students had to research something, and the research was put on the walls in 4 separate places on the walls, and they had to get out of their seats and walk around and write something down that's on the walls, and then go back and sit down. If those two things are engagement, then that's not engagement. That is just sheer tedium, bollocks, performative nonsense, and it doesn't engage people.
I'll go with that. It's probably better than
performative nonsense. Let's go with that.
So I mean that's an old standard, that one, isn't it? Sort of like, it is an engagement if there aren't post-it notes involved. That's the principle at work there, isn't there?
It's so active. Doing something active is not necessarily engaged. I think there's a very low bar for what engagement is, if that's what it is. So I think if we talk emotionally, most students would look at that and think, this is shit. This is absolute nonsense. If you're talking beyond that, then I do think there is an emotional level of engagement, and there's also a cognitive level, and both might be actually mixed together, of course.
But not provoked by
tedious, unimaginative task. I mean, if you want to engage people, then be a bit more imaginative about it, I suppose.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And my own little engagement anecdote, I remember years ago, this is how long ago it was, Martin. Do you remember Key Stage 3 SATs?
I do, yes.
Yeah, so that year, can't remember what year it was. That year, Romeo and Juliet was the Shakespeare text that Year 9 students had to make a response to on the SAT, and I had a low prior attaining set. We didn't call them that in those days. That's what they were, and they were not interested. They made it pretty clear they were not interested in reading and writing about Shakespeare. So in an effort to engage them with the text, I tried everything. And one of the things I tried was I got them to make sock puppets of the characters from the play, and then act out little modern vignettes from it. And most of them did it. I think this was a sign of the times. Most of them did like really rubbish Jeremy Kyle type interactions where the sock puppets attacked each other and were rude to each other. And anyway, we did that for a bit, and eventually we couldn't put it off any longer, and we had to engage with the text. And I remember sitting down next to this lad who was just, I think from memory, had to answer a question about Mercutio, and he was sitting there going, not engaging with the task. And I sat next to him and said, "Come on, I remember that your sock puppet that you made was a sock puppet of Mercutio, and you acted out the part of Mercutio in your terrible Jeremy Kyle thing. Come on, what can you remember about Mercutio? And he thought for a bit and said, I think he was blue.
It does. I mean, I do wonder where you got the idea of sock puppets from. I mean, why? You know, speaking as a drama teacher, you could have gone straight to the kids acting rather than making sock puppets.
Oh, look, we wanted to fill up as much time as we could, Martin.
Well, that's activities that fill up time is different than engagement, is it not?
It absolutely is, and you know, and obviously this is a serious weakness in my teaching at the time. I'm not claiming it as a worthwhile thing to do. But no, not a win. But what I think, you know, the message there is that to the extent that boy was engaged in the sock puppet making activity, and you know, he thought about, to a degree, the process of making a sock puppet.
Yeah, you would. It was a sock puppet. He did good.
Yeah, he remembered something about the material that he used to make the sock puppet. Yeah. And this is a sort of, I'm paraphrasing here, but this is something I remember reading in Dan Willingham's book, Why Don't Children Like School, which is obviously very much about engagement, was that we remember what we think about. And that if you thought about making sock puppets, you remember something about sock puppets.
Okay.
But if you remember, if you think about Romeo and Juliet and the characters' motivations and behaviours and the themes that play there, then that's what you think about. That's what you're more likely to remember. And I obviously didn't understand that at all in those days. So I wouldn't want to go as far as to say that you should never, as a teacher, do fun activities, that you should never do things just for the sake of trying to engage kids in something. But I think it's like my general position would be it's a mistake to use those activities as a vehicle for teaching complex curriculum content, because they're more likely to remember the activity and not the content.
I mean, there's also, let's not knock the making of puppets either. There's a long and noble tradition of making puppets.
I'm the last person to knock puppet making.
Well, it should be on the curriculum, maybe. Perhaps there should be, you know, we could go through.
You could do it. Well, I think you're right. And I think probably the best place for sock puppets would be in the DT curriculum, not the English curriculum.
Also, it's interesting that Willingham's book, which is the title, Why Don't Students, like school? That's the one. Since then, in this country, we've had more and more students leaving school, not attending school. It seems so. We've actually made more students dislike school since the publishing of that book. So, perhaps that's ironic.
Well, so to go back to, you know, so if I tie up in a single brief sentence the thesis of Willingham's book, it's the what children don't like about school is having to think. Thinking is about things that you're not expert at isn't pleasurable, and people don't like it and avoid it. And that's essentially the thesis, that they don't like schools because we make them do things which they find difficult, and that if I go back to that, you know, that my proposition that there's a tacit agreement that if teachers don't bother students won't misbehave. What I find, one of the things that I do quite a lot is I go into schools and I model lessons and I teach kids, and often when I'm doing that, I'm doing it in a very active way, and I'm expecting children to participate and answer questions and build on each other's thoughts. And sometimes that's a bit ambitious, and I just have to get them to repeat what somebody else just said. That's the level of engagement that we have to start with. And sometimes I ask a student to, you know, can you tell me what Martin just said? And they sort of look at you sometimes with bewildered hostility. Like, how dare you expect me to have engaged with the lesson?
Okay. And we've got a problem here that if kids don't like thinking, yet one of the ways to engage them is to get them cognitively engaged, let's say.
Yeah.
Isn't there a bit of a mismatch between those two propositions?
Yeah, I mean, so if you give kids things to do that they find easy and enjoyable, they'll be much more engaged on one level. But that's probably not a good bet for their education. So yeah, it is. It's tricky. So I think aligned to this is the age-old problem of motivation, and certainly my understanding of motivation has changed a lot over the years. I used to be very much convinced by the idea that if you make things fun and enjoyable, children will be motivated by the fun and enjoyment in order to then get them to be cognitively engaged and to think hard about difficult stuff. And that my lived experience is that they'll go along with the fun, and then they get to the difficult bit and they're like, nah. Whereas, maybe that's putting the cart before the horse, and that instead, by supporting children to be able to do difficult things, that what is more likely to be motivating is to have an experience of success at something challenging, which then is more likely to become self-perpetuating. And that's where that's where I'm come down more latterly.
And we've
What do
got
you
a
think
sort
of
of
that?
catch-22 there, in that you have to find that success in order to.
Yeah. So I don't think it's a catch-22, but it also requires. It's not like you can't do it. It takes effort.
But what
The
motivates you in the
teacher.
first place towards that effort is
It's the
if you
success.
haven't got to
Like
the success
here's
yet. So the
something really
success
hard.
needs to be early, and needs to
Yeah,
be.
success needs to be early. Yeah. I
So
think that.
there's this other thing that I go back to the Alex Crossman article he's talking about in there, is probably picking up from what our friend was saying. I can't. Bex Boomer Clark.
Or BBC for short, Martin.
Oh, yes, a good way of remembering it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's
Anyway.
taken me completely off track. Key stage 2 to key stage 3, the movement from primary to secondary education, there seems to be a huge dip in engagement, reported engagement, in student engagement in schools, and he's sort of positing that there's something essentially life affirming about primary school education. It's valued for its own sake, whereas moving into secondary education, there is a replacement of the nowness of it for a sort of instrumentalization of education. Here you are, we're doing this for your future. These are the things that you need to get in order to go on to the next stage. And he sort of posits that schools being future orientated, the world is trying to engage pupils by saying you'll get a better job if you do this, that a lot of kids actually disengage because they actually think that teachers don't know what the future is going to be like. The future looks like it's changing at an immeasurable speed. And perhaps that's where the climate change thing comes in. Some of them are sort of doom laden with the expectation that climate change is going to destroy the planet.
Yeah. AI
Others,
is going to take over.
AI and all these other things. And this thing we discussed the other week about mortgages become later and later. It's more difficult to get actual jobs that last a lifetime with a good wage. All these things sort of are
Everyone wants to
disempowering.
be a YouTube influencer like you, Martin.
Yeah, you never know. And this, also the complete raising of the school leaving age all the time. So now they have to stay until 18. So all these things sort of come together in some way to disengage pupils.
Yeah.
What's the nowness of being at school, the todayness of it. And if you take that away from kids, then really there's quite a lot of drudgery involved in trying to work for something in 6 years' time that you might get. And there's some sort of expectation in the culture of schools that every lesson is starting to be pretty similar. The movement from classroom to classroom, but the same techniques, the same expectations of behaviour, And I mean that in a sense of you will be sitting in a lesson doing a lot of writing and reading, whiteboard, interactive whiteboard in front of you, chanting or whatever the lessons are like in that particular school. All lessons done in the same way, because this is what a good lesson is now. And that's happened from, a few years ago, what is a good lesson. And it still now sort of comes in that you're going to be doing some recall, we're going to be doing some questioning, we're going to be doing this, that and the other. Your cognitive load is going to be blown by lunchtime, but you're still going to have to do it after lunch. All these things. So are we adding to the sort of misery, the misery of the teenage years, which are miserable enough possibly with the adolescence hormones zooming around your body?
Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot to unpack there, Martin.
Yeah, I thought I'd pile it on.
Yeah. Okay. So first thing, before I forget, if we think about primary school and the points you make about primary school,
I was taking up Alex's point there.
Yeah, of course. But if we then cross-reference that with what BBC was saying about the levels of engagement starting to fall off a cliff in year 6, that would correlate, because I think a lot of children's experience of year 6 is preparing for Key Stage 2 SATs, isn't it? And which seems like an inherently tedious way to spend your time. And then they do that in May, and then spend the rest of the year going on trips and making things out of papier-mâché and that sort of stuff. And as a sort of reward,
and sports day.
Yeah, and sports day, and the play, school play, all of that. Yeah, I know. All of that great stuff. But after SATs, when SATs are done, then we can do the stuff that isn't really very important but a bit fun, that kind of approach. And then Alex Crossman references the Ofsted report from some years back, the wasted years, where they were lambasting a lot of Key Stage 3 teaching in schools, and we're making the point that it's either sort of placeholding, time serving, or it's early preparation for GCSE content. And many schools during that period moved from 2-year GCSE courses to 3-year GCSE courses, which kind of makes sense. If you're sort of wasting 3 years of Key Stage 3, why not only waste 2? There's a kind of logic to that. And then with what's sometimes called the curriculum turn under Amanda Spielman's direction at Ofsted as chief inspector, there was a lot of pressure on schools to make the Key Stage 3 curriculum meaningful and rich and satisfying and important and valuable, and lots of people have done lots and lots of work on that. And so, are we saying that work was bad and wrong and meaningless, and actually we need to do something? We need some sort of radical solution, like Bex Boomer-Clark's suggesting, and ditch all that stuff? Or, as I think I'm suggesting, we kind of acknowledge that there's lots of good in lots of that, but it's often not being taught very well.
Right.
And when I say not being taught very well, this isn't to savage teachers, but it's to point out that it's taught in a way which doesn't demand or expect much participation from students.
Yeah, we've still got that problem with the Dan Willingham thing about thinking is not fun. Thinking is not engaging. You don't want to engage because thinking's the problem. So there is a catch-22 there, isn't there?
No, there isn't, because I've resolved that, Martin, by saying that. Right. Okay. So listen this time.
I did.
You didn't. You've forgotten already.
No.
Yeah. So success is motivating. Success is satisfying.
But the thinking is demotivating. So but even then, if I'm thinking and successful, I got it right. I mean, I don't know what else you're saying successful. It's still quite an instrumentalist thing about the outcome. It's always about the outcome, not the actual involvement in the thing itself.
I mean, I think the idea there is that the outcome is as close as possible to the point of instruction. So you're not deferring success for 5 or 6 years or
No, I understand. Yeah, I get that. I mean, but what it can do is become target oriented. That right, you've got to do this to tick this. You've done this. Well done.
Okay, let's not do that. I'm not suggesting any
rather than finding the thing itself engaging, the thing you're doing at that precise minute has an engagement involved in it emotionally and intellectually.
The thing itself, choose a thing.
Well, I'd choose something in drama, so
Yeah, go on. Let's choose the
crossover between drama and English. Let's choose Shakespeare. Let's choose Romeo and Juliet. Let's choose Mercutio.
What's the thing itself there?
Well, you tell me what he's doing with his sock puppet. What were you trying to get across about Mercutio?
Oh God, I can't remember. So long ago. I think something rubbish, probably. But so let's say the thing itself.
But it was something in the Key Stage 3 SAP, wasn't it? Which was so far away. Perhaps.
Don't worry about that.
Right.
So let's, for the sake of argument, Martin, let's say that the thing itself about Mercutio is understanding that he is an artifice, a construction used to convey a sense of characteristics in order to propel the play forward and to create.
Do you know what?
Opportunities.
I'm glazing over already.
Yeah.
I mean, how the hell can you engage anyone in that?
Right. So not by saying it, obviously.
No. So come on.
So I'd go a lot further back. I'd sort of talk about the fact, and I'd demonstrate the fact that that characters are an aspect of metaphor.
All right. So hang on. Right. Before we get well into the English lesson, but we got bigger ideas. Ideas. So you need to understand something that we're doing here. Pre-understanding something actually helps a lot. When I remember going into lessons and having absolutely no idea what happened in the week before because it wasn't connected in any way. It didn't seem to have anything flowing from one thing to another, and that was very disengaged. Mind you, I was completely disengaged through my schooling. Okay. So there's things there. You've written here about fun and the difference between fun. We're going back to this, trying to work out what actually is engagement, and fun is not engagement. I think we've established that.
Well,
you're saying you're talking about participation as engagement.
What somebody finds fun is obviously subjective. Right. So, you like going to the ballet. You told us.
I went to see quadruped. Look, last weekend. I was at the British Grand Prix watching motor racing.
Exactly. So, so some people find Grand Prix fun. I don't find Grand Prix fun. You've
never been to one?
I mean, I've seen them on telly, and they seem pretty dull.
Different. It's not as noisy. Anyway, carry on.
All right. So if it was all right, okay. Well, I can't imagine finding it fun, but maybe I would. But I don't know. There's even something like a broad act. I mean, I'm sure Grand Prix aficionados would say, well, that Grand Prix was a belter, but this one, no, it wasn't very good. That kind of thing. So even if you're a Grand Prix aficionado, you're not going to find the same level of enjoyment in every single Grand Prix. Same, something I've probably got slightly more experience of is a football match. Some of them are shit. And some of them are quite exciting. I think that would be fair, wouldn't it?
And very exciting.
And so, yeah, maybe. But again, it is there's a balance between subjectivity and objectivity there, isn't there? Between what you like and what's actually going on in front of you and your ability to participate in it, that will resolve as an experience that you might describe as fun. And that's going to be different for everyone. So trying to, like one of the things which sometimes people say about certain sort of pedagogical activities is like, oh, kids love this. But you don't have to go very far to find some kids that don't love it, whatever it is. Kids love group work. Well, what about the ones that hate it? Oh, yeah, forget about them, that kind of thing. So we all like different stuff. So trying to engage at the level of what people find fun is probably not what anyone's advocating for, and not necessarily possible.
I think
But I
some
think it's
people
more
are
about meaningful.
right. Meaningful. I think we could do. Could we meaningful, which involves the meaning of finding out things, but also meaningful at the time that this gives me some sort of purpose. This gives me. I mean, the Greeks. Can we go back to the Greeks on this?
You probably want to say something about Socrates, don't you?
Well, I think you do. You want to talk about appearance and reality, but I also want to sort of talk about Aristotle.
Oh, yeah.
And I see. I don't know how to pronounce this. Eudaimonia.
Yeah, I think that's good enough.
Which people mistranslate, I think, as happiness, but the better way of thinking about it is flourishing.
Yeah, which includes a sort of purposefulness as well as enjoyment, doesn't it?
Yeah, and reason, understanding something. So there's a reason element. So there's an educative element about that. But yeah, finding something in it for yourself at that moment is quite important. And that if we look at a place of school for flourishing, and not just flourishing sometime in the future, but flourishing today, then that gives quite a high bar for teaching and lessons and schools, really. I like the wood pigeon that you've got. You're talking of flourishing. You've got a wood pigeon somewhere near you.
I hope you're all enjoying the wood pigeon. Yeah. Yeah, somewhere. I think it's in the... there's a pigeon. Yeah, I think it's in the tree over there. But it's having a jolly old time, isn't it?
Yes, it sounds it. It's flourishing.
I'd say so. It's experiencing eudaimonia.
It's being a pigeon. Eudaimonia. Yeah.
Yeah.
But but there are pupils who will get more out of the Grand Prix and the football match, perhaps, than will get out of Romeo and Juliet and trigonometry and things like that.
Well, there are some pupils that will get more out of Romeo and Juliet than a Grand Prix.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to put a picture on. I just want you to.
Yeah, put a picture on.
I'm going to try. I've got to get rid of our names.
Brace yourselves, viewers. This is going to be.
This is going to be technical.
This is going to be hard, tough.
Are you ready?
Tough.
Are you ready? Here we go. Now, those of you listening, this is a famous cartoon. There's a man sat at a desk saying, "For a fair selection, everybody has to take the same exam. Please climb that tree." And we have a dog, a seal, a goldfish in a bowl, an elephant, a monkey, a bird, and another bird, a penguin.
Penguin.
Yeah, who can't fly, of course. And I've gone to the wrong one. Sorry, look at this. This is all going horrendously wrong.
It was going so well. It was going so well.
Here we go.
For your bonus challenge, Martin, can you? Oh, you've even got our names to come back.
Here we go.
Extraordinary. Well done. I'm very, very impressed. No, very good. So yeah, we've all seen that cartoon. What would you like to say about it?
Right. If this is the thing about personalization, I mean, is every pupil. We say they've got more in common than they haven't, but when we get through secondary schools, we are splitting up into more and more differences in terms of content, liking certain amounts of content. We're becoming more there's more discernment in what we like and dislike. We're at the age when we really start to form our character, our personality, and having things told to us that perhaps we can really start to turn off, and say, I'm not into this at all. This is what I'm into. And more so these days with so much stuff available online and, in the very sort of people call in sort of Marxist theory, late capitalist society we live in, that we're surrounded by lots and lots of choices everywhere except one place, and that's school. And just as we become more burgeoningly interested in these choices, school is taking these choices away. So particularly at this age, we're in conflict with our lifestyle and our life options than the type of thing that school is offering, which seems to be going against that in so many ways.
So, yeah, okay. Although, and I'm going to be, ever so slightly pedantic, there is a small element of choice as children get older, and is that they get to choose some of the subjects that they're going to be examined
2 or 3.
Yeah, it's fewer than it was, isn't it? Whereas that's not the case in most other education systems. They're much broader for much longer. And so very often in lots of education systems, you're following, you're not really getting any choice until post 18 or limited. And what was his old Rishi Sunak was quite aerated about the idea that kids could drop maths at 16, and that was what was wrong with our society, that we needed more numeracy. So more children studying maths up until the age of 18 was the obvious answer. Do you remember the late lamented advanced British standard that he no.
No, sorry, was I meant to answer there? I thought... Advanced British standard.
Well, it says it all, Martin. Says it all. Nobody cares. He's gone. So what are you saying? You're saying that we need a school neneeds to reflect modern society in
right. I'm going to give you something here from Fiona Millar, who's the wife of a certain podcaster, Alistair Campbell, who used to be big in the Labour movement, of course.
I think he might describe himself as still being
not as big as he was. He's not at the centre of power anyway. Millar calls for a fresh focus on sports, music, art, project work, civic engagement, which could motivate more students by reflecting their interests and preparing them better for life beyond school. And she says, I think you need a much more personalised experience. There is not one single story, and you need to be able to meet the needs of all their children. That would make school a more enjoyable experience, and I think the teachers would be under less pressure too.
I mean, that's an empirical statement, which is testable, isn't it? So would that be the case? I think that's on fairly shallow ground to sort of make that claim. I don't think it's true.
Right, there's less arts and sports in school now than there was 20 years ago. Apparently,
is there less sport?
Yeah, apparently, there's less time for PE, should we say?
Is there? Yeah. Right. Okay. Well, look, I'm all for having a bit more time for the arts and even PE. I think that's fine. I think we have too much of the other stuff. That's pretty fair to say. But I'll give you this. So a lot of my nieces and nephews have been educated in Ireland, and one of the things that I didn't know about until, what are you laughing at?
Ireland.
Ireland. My cod Irish accent there. Apologies to everyone who's had to suffer that. Sorry. One of the things that they've experienced as part of the Irish education system is in their, I think it's their equivalent of Year 9. There is no teaching for a year. Like they're not. It's almost like teachers are not allowed to teach academic subjects, and kids go in and sort of do some sort of project. And this might, potentially this is really satisfying for some kids and they love it. But it turns out on the tiny anecdotal sample of my nieces and nephews, they all hated it, and they became completely disaffected with school as a result of this wasted year, and then couldn't really get back into it afterwards. I don't
think Fiona Millar's suggesting everyone does that for a whole time. I think she's saying that the timetable continues. There is a curriculum there, though I can see something in Year 9 that actually you could do differently in that year as being quite an interesting idea.
So some people really don't they, like the EPQ that happens in sixth forms, extended project, and some people have suggested that we do more of that earlier on. Is that the sort of thing you'd like?
I don't know. I'm trying to think of Fiona. Yeah, I think she might. She says about project work, but again, where would you target it and for what purpose? The thing about also civic engagement, I think, is interesting. Those sorts of things that you can see as part of a baccalaureate qualification in sixth form, but why not do certain things earlier in the year and not have so much maybe that is academic education, but a sort of a wider view of education.
Lots of schools push the DFE, Duke of Edinburgh qualifications, and maybe that if that became even more an expectation for all children to engage with at some level, then that does have, as part of the activities in there, you have to do some charity work, don't you? You have to do you have to engage in some sort of skill. You have to do some physical exercise.
Tying knots. No, that's Scouts, wasn't
Could
it?
be. Well,
Yeah.
I think tying knots
Cubs.
could overlap with the DFE, were it your passion, Martin.
And Bob a Job, used to do Bob a Job. That got sort of knocked on the head now, I think, because of
because of paedophiles, Martin.
Paedophiles, yeah. I'll do anything you like for a shilling. Let's move hurriedly on from that.
Yeah, let's do that. So maybe is that the sort of thing that schools should be putting at the centre of what they're weaving in between the academic?
If there's a sort of impression that schools have become more instrumentalist, future oriented, moving from the now to the future, that you're going to get these great results only if you do this and this for the next 6 years, I think there is something to be said for the things that just count for now, something that's just doing it for today or within the foreseeable. So we're doing a concert, we're doing you're in a band, you could do this. It's things that do have certain things, plus the social side of schooling, the things you do with your mates, that whole sort of intrinsic, like, a lot of people, not all by any means, but a lot of people like school because they get to be with their mates. They come from the society around and they come together in some sort of communal enjoyment.
Sing Kumbaya.
That sort of thing. That sort of thing.
So I can't remember who said this, Martin, where I've read it or heard it, but I remember being quite struck by coming across the idea that children are not motivated by the idea of becoming a successful adult. Children are interested in being a successful child. Yeah. And that seems to coincide with what you're describing. I think so,
because adult is such a strange, abstract idea. And when
they look
become
really
an adult,
boring, don't they?
You also, when you become an adult, there's not that big a jump from where you were. I mean, it's just more experiences. You don't necessarily become this. You don't become this hugely different
we've got
human
these
being.
Millennial children, haven't we? Sort of in their 30s.
Yeah, continuing. Sort of Perhaps that's where I'm going wrong. I should have grown up. Sorry, that was the problem here. That's me.
If anyone is in the mistaken belief that Martin is in his 30s, do get in touch.
That's very true. Twice that. So. The other thing, going back to what you were saying, something about engagement, and so I think we're saying things there about kids actually enjoying the experience of school. That can be thinking, that can be emotionally, that can be socially, that can be culturally engaging, rather than having fun in a very shallow sense of that word. So eudaimonia, flourishing in that way. You were talking about teaching itself. That's quite dull in lessons, that there's something there. So should we be looking for teachers more as mavericks, as characters, rather than scripted automatons reading, from the slides that are being provided from the central office?
Look, I mean, the problem with mavericks is that rather a lot of them are quite bad.
You mean bad mavericks or bad teachers?
Yeah, bad mavericks.
Bad at being a maverick.
My
well, good mavericks.
Teacher, Mr. Gittis, when I was at school, was
he called Mr. Git?
Well,
by the kids.
He was a git. I didn't like him.
No, actually, we could be sued for this. He's a very nice man.
I think, bless him, he's passed.
Okay.
But yeah, I know. Anyway, he was considered a bit of a maverick, so much so that he didn't teach us the exam specification. And when we went to sit our history GCSE, nobody had studied any of the things on the paper. So nobody wants that kind of maverick approach to teaching, do they?
Yeah, but we're talking about maverick and mavericks. There's mavericks who don't do the job, and there's mavericks who actually excel because they are offering more.
We've kind of forced that out of the profession increasingly. I think, haven't we? We're a bit intolerant of people doing their own thing, and we're much more interested in consistency as a byword for quality.
Right.
And I think, my view on consistency would be that if you sort of consider an image of people at a production line producing, identical packages, nobody shown that image would be like, oh yeah, no, that's my vision for effective teaching. So there's nobody, I would imagine, who thinks that PE teachers and maths teachers should be doing exactly the same thing every lesson, because that would be stupid. And as a sort of model for what good consistency might look like would be an orchestra with everybody playing their part, playing their instrument, but contributing to the beautiful music.
The head teacher is thinking, I could be the conductor.
Yes. Yeah, and there's a difference, isn't there, between sort of conducting and getting the best out of people and getting them to contribute to something that they value and can see the beauty of, rather than forcing them to comply.
Yeah, can we go with a more like a jazz orchestra?
You want more
improv? Like I'd like some improv in there, some doing your own thing, and I'm going to go on a sax solo for the next 20 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I can kind of understand why some teachers might be cautious about your jazz ensemble. Because I think what makes a jazz ensemble work is that all of the musicians have to be incredibly good and really, really tight. Yeah. And they have to play, they have to really practice together in a way.
Loose and cool, man.
Tight and loose. Yeah. But they have to be incredibly skilled individually, as well as really respectful of each other.
Are you saying we shouldn't have good teachers? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying, Martin. I'm saying it's really difficult. And there's a scalable model for education. Expecting all schools to be jazz ensemble is probably a little bit naive.
Okay, but let's go into the idea.
Maybe the orchestra is a
yeah, but they're sticking to a script. They're sticking to a script. That's the thing. But there's also the thing. Even if you are or are not sticking entirely to a script, is the quality of the playing of the instrument. So let's say that you are a teacher. And you've got a monotonal voice. You can't be heard. You're quite a shrinking violet, sort of sat in these sort of behind the teacher's desk. I once had a teacher who was having chaos in her lessons, and I went to see the lesson, and she was sat behind a desk. In front of her on the desk were piles of books that she couldn't be seen. And then beyond that, and she was a music teacher, there was music stands that were sort of in the sort of like a barbed wire fence in front of the desk, So she was completely teaching unseen with this sort of protective layers around her, and she was wondering why she wasn't getting it. So in the first instance, I think she'd done this in order to protect herself from the class. So scared was she of them.
That's very sad, isn't it?
It's sad, and she hadn't realised what she'd done, and she'd really sort of created this thing around her, which was horrendous to see. But to take that away from her was quite emotional for her. But it did help her at least communicate a bit better than obviously she was with all those things in front of her.
I watched you. I think you might have told this story then, but I watched you give a class on voice. Teacher's voice and how you can protect it and amplify it and use it more effectively. And is that some work that you did with that teacher, as I recall?
I did some work on. I mean, this was basic stuff in the first instance, but I was her line manager because I was head of performing arts. That was the reason for doing that. So yeah. But voice, I think, is vital. You can have a very
people's
dull
voices. Voice. Yeah. So what are you saying? That if you've got a dull voice, it doesn't have to be dull. No. Come to a Martin Robinson training seminar, and we can make it fun.
I should sponsor this episode.
But is that can everyone have a more expressive, more engaging voice?
And
there we are.
And with acting training or voice training of any sort, you can. Margaret Thatcher, for goodness sake, underwent voice training when she became prime minister in order to make her a bit more engaging or whatever. But there are ways and techniques that you could. It did. Oh yes, it did work. David, I think you'll find it did work.
That's remarkable. I thought it
was almost as though she was in the room.
Yeah.
Or in the podcast.
Martin.
Look, we're in your garden with the wood pigeon.
We're in my garden. We're in Martin's closet.
I'm coming out later. Don't worry.
Look, if we're doing Margaret Thatcher impersonations, we've probably run out of material.
I think we
have. Let's shut it down. So look, let's just a last couple of points just to finish on with.
Yeah.
So I think kind of what we've explored is that there's nothing wrong with wanting school to be enjoyable, but we need to be sort of thinking about what that looks like, and just enjoyment is pretty shallow. That needs to be coupled with meaning and purpose. And that, you made the point earlier, and I intended to come back to it, about engagement sometimes being perceived or conceived of as being active, and so you're only active if you're wandering around. I would say I would counter argue there that listening is incredibly active. Things which involve people being silent, sometimes they're very, very active and they're thinking very, very hard. So that's something to consider there. But it's I guess what I'd invite listeners to sort of think about here is, what do you want engagement to look like in your classroom? What do you want children's experience of your lessons to be? Do you want them to find meaning and purpose and enjoyment in what you're doing with them? And if you suspect your students aren't experiencing those things, what could you do? And if you're a school leader, perhaps, and you're thinking about introducing policies to sort of get teachers to comply with more engaging teaching, what could backfire? What could go wrong with that sort of approach?
Yeah, I mean, little things like voice and things like that could actually be done from a central sort of idea that we do want teachers to be technically able to communicate in an interesting way. And you can do that in terms of getting your voice to work better, the body, how you use the classroom, use the space, and all those sorts of things, and how you engage with pupils in the classroom to make sure that they can be heard as well. If you're having a question and answer thing, a lot of pupils don't hear what the other pupils are saying. There are ways you can work on things like that. So there are technical things you can do. Absolutely, the thing about being still and silent can be engaging. You could be listening to something, like a poem, a piece of music or whatever, or a treatise on history or whatever that you're finding very emotionally engaging.
I read a very good article about some drama teaching on stillness and silence.
There you go. Who did that then?
It was you, Martin.
Oh, my goodness. On my Substack.
Yes.
Yes, my new Substack. Do follow and whatever, subscribe and do whatever you can, blah, blah, blah. And to David's excellent one as well, of course. David's over there. There he is.
There he is. There he is. Listen, thank you for wasting yet another hour or so of your time. I hope it was
engaging.
If nothing else, engaging.
Fun. It wasn't maybe. Dead Poets Society, I'll tell you that.
Do you want to stand on your table?
I don't. I think it will break.
Okay.
Captain, my captain.
Yeah. Okay. So engagement shouldn't be about standing on your table quoting Whitman. What should it be? How do we find purpose and meaning in classrooms? How do we get children more engaged in the stuff that they find hard and challenging? How do we make them feel that it's worth the effort? How do we make them feel
flourish?
How do we make them feel that it's worth gambling on themselves and their own flourishing?
And
that's a nice end, isn't it?
Yeah, there we go. We'll end it there.
There you go.
Thank you. Ta-ra, everyone.
Bye.